Bigfoot Collectors Club with Michael and Riley. I know a story of high strangeness or two. Let's do this.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Bigfoot Collectors Club, the show where we talk to amazing guests about their personal paranormal history and share stories of high strangeness. I'm your host, Michael McMillan. With me always is the polyphonic sound blaster,
Riley Bray.
That was submitted by our dear patron, Aurora Borealis, a.k.a. the Resident Drow, over on BCC The Other Side. So
Right on. Good one.
Thank
you.
If you got a nickname for Riley, hit us up over on The Other Side. We're going to jump into it. Riley, hi. How you doing?
Hi. Great. Very excited about this. Let's get right in there.
I'm very excited. We haven't had this guest on in 4 years, over 4 years. Who are they, you may be asking? Well, they're the author of 8 critically acclaimed books. His latest book is 2025's Fourth Wall Phantoms, Reflections on the Paranormal, Narrative, and Fiction's Becoming Fact, which you can get right now as I'm holding up to camera. I got my copy.
Great cover. In
the mail last week. Club Scouts, please welcome back to the clubhouse our friend Joshua Cutchin. Joshua.
Hi everyone. Thanks for having me back. I don't know which is more shocking, the fact that it's been 4 years or the fact that I've been doing this for long enough to have done it for 4 years,
Yeah.
This year is my 10th, the 10th anniversary of A Trojan Feast, my first book.
That's crazy.
Hard to believe. I just turned 40 yesterday. So
Congratulations.
All right.
Good,
Yeah.
Happy birthday. Wow, that's wild. So 8 books in 10 years.
Yeah.
How do you do it?
I mean, depending on, I think there's a way to count it that it's like 10 books too. I mean, I never know how many to say because like Ecology has that companion book, but I also thought of it as one book and so I tend to lump them into projects. But what was your question?
How do you do it? How are you doing this, Josh?
I came to the realization a couple of years ago that there's some stuff that I've worked myself towards, talents that I have and talents that the good Lord has just given me. And the two things that I can do that I don't think necessarily can be taught are, number one, I have a strange amount of stamina while playing tuba, which like is like the most common compliment that I get at gigs is like, how do you keep going? Like that's the most common thing. So, whatever. It's not, not the fastest or the highest or the lowest or the loudest, but I'll take it.
No, that's an athletic feat.
And then the other thing is just being able to write very quickly, and I think that's a big part of it, which isn't necessarily a virtue. I should say that not everything that I write quickly is good, but there have been some days on other projects where I've pumped out like 15,000 words in one day. Granted, I have a refractory period after that where I need to recover.
Gotta go play that tuba.
Yeah, exactly. I think I probably average about between. If I know where the subject matter is going, probably between 2,000 and 5,000 words a day is not too much for me. So
that's amazing.
It is, like I said, it's amazing until like you get too fast and loose with stuff, or until you keep writing books that are way too long, like I seem to be doing lately. But yeah, so that's the only explanation that I have for it. 6 months ago, we made the transition where I'm treating all my gigs, both in music and in this sphere, as a full-time job. So that has obviously given me more time to do these sort of things. So, so with that in mind, I've just been locking myself down here in the basement of the house and being like, you've got to finish this today.
Congratulations.
Whatever's on the docket. Yeah. So
wow, that is so cool, man. And I love this new book. I'm reading it right now. I can't read as fast as you can write, so I'm not at the end of the book yet, but I cannot wait to talk about this. But before we do, because I don't really think we got into this when you and Timothy were on the show back in 2021. Let's go back to the beginning. What is your personal paranormal history, Josh? How did you get into this subject to begin with?
That's a good question. I was always just sort of what I would call like a creature kid. Like, the first movie I ever remember seeing was the 1933 King Kong. I think there's I've got the old McFarlane Toys King Kong right there.
Yeah.
So like King Kong always held a special place in my heart. And then just anything with a creature, any sort of creature films. Stan Winston was like a holy figure in my household, and all those Harryhausen movies and such. But also I grew up in a household that wasn't really dismissive of these topics in any sort of way, and there was never any. I talked to some of my friends who were raised Christian like I was, and there was like this sort of like, oh, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to entertain the possibility of ghosts and this and that and the other. And that was never a thing in my household. It was always, well, at least he's reading, right? So that, and, my dad apparently was into Bigfoot a little bit.
Okay.
So it was just something that has always sort of been with me in the background. And, every couple of years I'd buy a book on Bigfoot, especially. Bigfoot was my thing. But, I have a copy over there on the shelf of Jerome Clark's The Unexplained that I've had since middle school that my mom, repaired the cover using packing tape and stuff like awesome. That. So this has been there for a while. But I got a desk job at the University of Georgia in 2012, and that was, I'm not disparaging this current era of podcasts, but there's it's almost like there's so much paranormal podcasts right now that's just sort of like a little bit sensory overload. Like I literally can't keep up with all the people who deserve to be listened to every week. But back then was sort of like back in that sort of 2012 era was in my mind sort of a golden age of podcasts when like a lot of these things that have been driven into the ground since then were sort of novel back then.
Yeah, I've got my railroad hammer and some nails over here.
Yeah, I mean,
just used it.
There was a time when people would mention, Skinwalker Ranch, and I'd be like, oh, they're going to talk about that. Now it's like, please don't mention it again. I've heard enough. I'm good.
Playing the hits.
So that's what I'm referring to. So so I had this hour commute there and back to and from work, and I was really like getting into the whole paranormal podcasting thing, and that really rekindled a lot of my interest. And my sister-in-law gifted me an Amazon gift card that I ended up spending on a book, and I was like, I'm going to indulge in a Bigfoot book.
Yeah.
And it was J. Robert Alley's Raincoast Sasquatch, which is just a phenomenal book.
I've never read that.
It's great. It's great. It's really good because, since I pal around with Tim Renner, I've got some odd perspectives on on what Bigfoot is. But and I think I get the sense that Robert is more in the flesh and blood camp, but he does a really good job of respecting a lot of these indigenous perspectives and giving them time to breathe and putting them in dialogue with what the flesh and blood camp sees. So that was sort of the book that kind of was the aha moment, I guess, for me, because there was a portion of the book where he's talking about, I believe it's the Tlingit people of Alaska. They believe in the Bukwas, or maybe it's the Kakwakiwak. Anyway, one of the Alaskan tribes, forgive me, believe in the Bukwas, and they said that if you are gifted food by the Bukwas, and you take it and you eat it, you're trapped with the Bukwas forever. I'm like, oh, that sounds like European fairy folklore.
Yeah, fairy rules.
Someone should write a book on that. And then you sit with that for a moment, and Nick Redfern doesn't write it, and you're like, is this supposed to be me? So that was the genesis for A Trojan Feast, and then. I still have to pinch myself every now and then because, I mentioned Jerome Clark's book that I read since middle school. And back in 2015, I'm reading a review of A Trojan Feast in Fortean Times by Jerome Clark, who's saying nice things about it. Yeah, so it does have that sort of like, in the paranormal nerdiest way, it's like the idea of a high school basketball player getting to play with LeBron or something.
Totally. Yeah.
It's got that sort of vibe.
Right.
Yeah. And so the community was really accepting and off to the races, and just never looked back.
So I'm curious, have you had any instances or encounters yourself?
Yeah, I have to write them down. I don't know if y'all have noticed this, but and I might even mention this in the new book, but there's a half-life to your memory of these things. They can be really impressive in the moment, and then the further away you get from them, if you don't forget them outright, you end up sort of explaining them away. You've got to kind of put yourself back in the moment. So yeah, I've had a couple of things, but mostly ghosty stuff. A couple of Bigfoot adjacent things, which maybe we can talk about at some point. But
you can talk about them right now if you want to.
This is a great
This is the place.
Yeah.
This is the time.
Settle in. My parents expanded the home that I grew up in. I believe this was 1990, and throughout the course of that renovation, which ended up sort of doubling the square footage of the house, so it was a significant renovation. My mother and I kept on finding a stack of like 4 quarters in the strangest of places. By which I mean, those big, thick dictionaries that we used to use, the wide ones. You don't take a dictionary off the shelf, but every couple of months, probably back then, And there was like a stack of 4 quarters back there, 4 quarters behind a glass in the cupboard, on top of the fridge, like just strange places that there shouldn't be. And this was in parts of the house that none of the people working on the house should have had access to. And to this day, no one in my family has admitted to doing that. So it's only in hindsight that I was like, oh, that's kind of a fairy poltergeisty kind of thing, right? So that I went to Waverly with a girlfriend back in 2008 and had some interesting stuff. Had a door slam open in my face, which was really like, I kind of always had in the back of my head like, oh, this, I believe in ghosts as a stance, but not like, oh no, I know that this is a thing. That's what I refer to as my can't get the toothpaste back in the tube moment.
Yep.
I think I saw a Civil War ghost on a tour of a Civil War historic site.
How did it
faint
appear?
apparition? What are we talking?
It was a home that was used as a hospital during the war, and in order to sort of get one group of tourists in and the other group of tourists out, those are really narrow stairways, just as wide as your shoulders, right? And so the group that was exiting had to stay at the top, while the group that was coming in came up, and then after they were up, then the group at the top would come down the bottom. So I got to the top of the stairs, and in the middle of the crowd was this boy in a gray uniform, maybe 14 or 15, and he had these really sunken eyes, and he was looking straight at me. And what is still to this day sort of most impressive about that to me is that I didn't go, oh, it's a ghost. Like I thought it was like a cosplayer, or
Totally.
an actor or
Yeah.
something.
Right, yeah.
So, I caught up to my parents because I was probably still in college. This was during just a summer trip in Virginia at the time. I said, boy, that kid was really into it, wasn't he? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, the kid in the soldier's uniform. And they're like, what are you talking about? Asked everybody else in our tour group. Nobody else saw him. The people who were selling tickets at the front of the site, which are the de facto gatekeepers, of that, said that no one had bought a ticket who was wearing anything like that day, nor were there any reenactors on site. So it's one of those like ghost in hindsight kind of moments. And then, I like I said, I have a list of synchronicities and bits and bobs that have happened over the years. But I guess since we are on this show, I should probably talk about the Bigfoot stuff.
Yeah, you should.
3 Bigfoot things. The first one was on my honeymoon. We went to, yeah, I know, right?
Honeymoon and Bigfoot.
Honeymoon
Well,
Bigfoot, yeah.
if I only knew, right? So this is before I'm really, involved.
You got married to 2 things that day.
Right. Well, no, the tragedy is that my wife, I sort of did a bait and switch with my wife where she never knew she was marrying a paranormal author until, 2 or 3 years into it. And then it's like, oh, hon, I guess I'm doing this now. But it was on our honeymoon to Blue Ridge, Georgia, which is, of course, Georgia's #1 Bigfoot hotspot, I would argue. And a cabin last night there. It's overlooking this valley, and I'm drunk in a hot tub, and I'm hooping and hollering like you do, trying to, I thought it'd be fun to like just see if I could hear something, see if Bigfoot would respond.
So you're
back.
intentionally doing like Bigfoot howls
I'm
from the hot tub.
doing the Bigfoot shtick, right? Yeah, from the
hot tub,
from
Bigfoot
the
howling.
hot tub. Oh yeah, hot
tub,
drunk,
Bigfoot
hot
honeymoon.
drunken Bigfoot hot tub action is what it is. A screened-in porch overlooking the valley, beautiful location, great. Next day we're going out to the car, and she takes some lighter things out to the car, and she comes back and she goes, "Why did you do that?" I said, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "Why did you do that?" And I'm like, hon, we're like not even a week into this marriage. Let's not start off this way with an argument, right? Like just tell me what I did wrong. And she says, The Rock. And I'm like, what? So I used to have a picture of it somewhere. I don't know what's happened. It's gotten lost in the shuffle of device upgrades and such. But behind my driver's side rear wheel is a rock that's like about this big, like wedged behind the wheel. I didn't.
Whoa.
Wouldn't, and didn't drive over that on the way in from dinner or wherever we were the night before. To my, as memory serves, to the right about, I don't know, 15 yards is a barren mountainside of red Georgia clay. It's a drop off on the other side. The driveway to get up there, I mean, probably between 1/10 and 2/10 of a mile at an extreme angle. So look, could it have been a prankster? Yeah, although if I was a prankster, I probably would have put it on top of my car or on the roof.
It's a weird prank.
Right, it's a weird prank, and I'm lazy enough that I would have seen that driveway and been hell no, I'm not going up there to do that.
Especially with a rock.
Yeah, especially with a rock. And what I meant about the clay is that it looked like it was a rock that had been carried up from further down, towards the main road. It didn't look like it had tumbled from that mountainside because it would have been red.
Right.
So just the Bigfoot adjacent experience, right? So that was a Bigfoot-ish experience I had. I did go out to Tim's Site 7 research site.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And I've been out there a couple times, and I'm trying to joke less about being paranormal kryptonite because I'm constantly afraid that that's keeping my experiences at arm's length. But distinctly, the first time I went out there, I'd say within 3 minutes or so, there's this sound of something huffing and moving away from us on 2 feet. And Tim's MO is that he doesn't like to use a lot of flashlights he likes to really adjust to the darkness, so we really couldn't see it. But I've listened to whitetail grunts that didn't sound like a whitetail. I'm less confident in my ability to identify something on 2 feet versus 4, but there is that sort of patep, this patter that you hear with 4 feet, and this sounded like something just went and just sort of shuffle. Something just didn't want us to be there. That's what it sounded like. And then
Wild.
The final one is the strangest one, and this happened, oh my goodness, coming up on a year ago. I was with some friends of mine, and we were in, again, Blue Ridge, Georgia, and we were at a Bigfoot expedition. I'm not entirely sure how much I should say about the particulars, but it was over about 15 minutes of private drive that we had permission to go into the back of the Chattahoochee National Forest. Nothing happened, except we're all sitting around the campfire, and again, in the middle of nowhere. I can't really stress this enough. It's a back part of the Chattahoochee that you would either have to use this road that we use, that we were the only ones who had permission to use, or you had to schlep all the way from the front end of the forest and whatnot. Not accessible is what I'm trying to get at. And we're sitting around the campfire, and I hear a car door slam.
Yep.
And I look at this person directly across the fire from me, and I say, "Did you hear?" And they go, "A car door slam?" Yeah. And there are 2 cars there on either side of us. We're all accounted for around the campfire. And it's just a car door slamming in the middle of this wilderness area. And, I mentioned this I don't think anybody there really understood the significance of that. But, anybody who was familiar is that's Ron Moorhead territory. That's John Keel territory. That's this strange thing that
goes with the Bigfoot phenomenon.
It goes with for whatever it is. You can say it's parapsychological like I do, or you can say it's Bigfoot imitating things, whatever. I don't know. But it's something that people have associated with. I'm of the mindset now, I've given this some thought, the baby crying is the other thing that people say that they hear. And that to me is always about luring you out into the woods. But to me, a car door slam is it's like a punctuation mark. It's like an announcement, I'm here, or conversely, I'm gone by. It's like a coming or going kind of sound. Yeah.
I've either pulled up and I've gotten out of the Bigfoot vehicle and I'm announced myself, or I've jumped in and I'm driving away.
Right. So that was my, I try to frame these, I try to frame the sort of field work that I do, because I've been doing more of it in the past 2 years. I try to frame it within the context of goals versus consolation prizes, you know what I mean? So that you can walk away with something that was kind of neat, And
cool.
The consolation prize for Bigfooting is that even if nothing strange happens, you at least get to be out in the wilderness, in the woods at night, which a lot of people just don't do,
Yeah.
But that was that evening's consolation prize. And that in some ways it was kind of exactly what I would have wanted to have heard, you know.
It's a very, very Joshua Cutchin thing to happen.
It's a very Joshua Cutchin thing to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
All right, well, we have to take a quick break. We're not slamming the door shut on this conversation. We'll be right back. Okay, Josh, I want to get into this. So, Fourth Wall Phantoms. First of all, I'm loving this book. It's very cool, and something that I was thinking about when you were talking about making the transition into writing is I'm very surprised that it didn't come sooner for you, because I feel like you really have a take on this subject that's very unique. I feel like you're, like you mentioned, you're looking at the things that people tend not to look into or look at in the subject matter, and this book is no different. So just before we dive in, like, where does that perspective come from?
Well, you know, the only person who really wanted me to go into music was my high school band director. Like everybody else is like, Josh, you need to write. And I'm like, but I love, you know. So, you know, I don't have any regret about that. I like having parts of my brain that do wildly different things, because inevitably I get tired of music and I want to sort of pull my focus over here to this, or I get tired of the paranormal and I'm like, okay, I've just got to tune out from this and focus on music for a while. So that pendulum swing keeps things fresh. But yeah, I suppose what happened for me was that I saw the sort of reception that A Trojan Feast was getting, and it was sort of a light bulb for me, where it's like, oh, there is room to talk about this stuff. You just don't have to talk about the entirety of the phenomenon. Like, right? You don't have to solve what Bigfoot is or what UFOs are. Like, you just have to look at one tiny thing and then just go really deep into the paint on that one thing. And there's still a space for that. And there are, you know, that has been the gift that keeps on giving, in a lot of ways. And I was just having a conversation with a friend about this the other day. It really is kind of humbling, because I distinctly remember a moment in my childhood, you know, reading a Lauren Coleman book or something and talking to my dad and be like, Dad, can I be a cryptozoologist when I grow up? And in the most loving way, my father being like, that's not a thing, son. So yeah, it does sort of feel like a full circle moment. And I'm really grateful for your kind words about Fourth Wall Phantoms, because it's a real departure in some ways. And you live with these projects for so long in a vacuum, where it's like you're the only one reading them, and then the people who are reading them are people that you're like, you know, who are helping you do the layout and helping you edit. And it's like, are you giving me a completely objective opinion? So just to hear that it's resonated with some people has been really rewarding. And it's a departure in terms of you know, the first person, and a departure in terms of the fact that I take some opinions, I think, for the first time ever.
It feels very personal, but in a way that I think as podcasters, you know, we can relate to, because you are bringing your personality into this book, and you are bringing your opinions into it as well, which I like, because it feels like I have a friend with me as I'm reading.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I think that as you go through the book, there's multiple reasons for adopting that more informal tone, not the least of which that some of the subject matter is kind of heady. Like, I personally find it easier to talk about idealism and dual aspect monism and panpsychism in conversation than I do in terms of reading. I think a lot of Bernardo Kastrup, but I try to read his stuff sometimes and I'm like, what did you just say? So that's part of it. The book might be a large-scale magical working, too. We'll see.
Kind of feels that you're cutting me off at the pass. I'm curious if you've had any results. But why don't you tell everybody just roughly what it's about, big picture, and we'll dig into it a little bit here.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, this is one of the first times I've talked about
it,
so
what?
I'm a little bit scattered.
Let's workshop it, baby.
Let's workshop it. So I have a lot of, in addition to the taking a look at small things that no one else is looking at, I also like to sort of interrogate my own beliefs and opinions, right? And I try to do that in terms of religion and in terms of politics and in terms of the paranormal. Like, do you really feel this way, Josh? Let's sort of dig down into this and try to see this from another angle. And one of those things were these stories where people say that they met fictional characters, and you read those and like you just are like, okay, this is trash, just throw it away. But what happens if you try to engage with those seriously? What happens? What sort of things do you have to concede and view with an open hand as opposed to a closed hand? And where will that lead you on that journey? So, very famous example that pops up in the book is Alan Moore and John Constantine.
Oh, I'm so glad you're talking about this.
Alan Moore comes up with John Constantine. Later is eating a sandwich in Westminster, and Constantine walks up. Multiple people who have worked on the Hellblazer comics have seen John Constantine. In a kind of resembling Sting in a tie a trench coat or schlubby suit. And you talk about in the book how creators who are writing this character tend to see him or run into the avatar of him, for lack of a better term, in the real world. And the thing that's really fun about it is this idea that you point out that one of the traits they all have in common is they don't want to talk to him because they're like, you don't want to engage with John Constantine because if you're engaging with a man who's like fighting demons, you could get pulled into something that is going to be way over your head. Well, I mean, yeah, and there is the sense like, Bigfoot and alien abductions and ghosts and everything, like they're terrifying in their own right, but there's something like existentially terrifying about interacting with a fictional character. I think it's like, am I going to be pulled into some sort of fiction and never return, or is my life a fiction? Like those are the sort of questions that sort of well up. So there are a couple of stories about this. There's a story about the shadow and this scenario. There's a story
talk about that. That's a great John Keel mentions it in Mothman Prophecies, but it's a really good example of this of what you call a fictional incursion in the book.
Yeah, that's just the sort of shorthand that I end up using.
It's great term. I couldn't think of a better one.
Well, thanks. So the shadow, in case anybody doesn't know, is started out as a pulp character and was written by Walter B. Gibson, a very famous radio serial as well. But for a time, Gibson was writing at an apartment building in Greenwich Village, and after he had moved out, Hans Holzer was doing some research for a book called Yankee Ghosts that he had, and he was collecting stories of this particular, unbeknownst to him, perhaps unrelated Greenwich Village apartment building, where somebody was having typical haunting sort of manifestations. But one of the things that a visitor to the house had seen was a tall figure with a cloak and a wide brimmed hat. And later Gibson came out and said, "Oh yeah, that was my apartment. That's where I wrote a lot of my most intense, shadow novels and such." And what they're seeing is the shadow, like sort of not a tolpoidic manifestation, but like a psychic impression of that character that I left behind during my time there. And so you like, those are kind of the Alan Moore one and that one are sort of the two most famous ones. And like if you're in this sort of domain that we are, you've heard those stories a couple of times, and I thought that those are kind of like the only ones. There are tons of them. It's kind of terrifying. And it's like, a quick plug. Every now and then when I write a book, oftentimes there's a book that I find that I just kind of want to copy paste into my book.
Yeah.
Not in terms of like plagiarism, but being like, oh, all of this is pertinent. And there's a book that was really important to this called Embodied Imaginations by Chindambaram Ramesh. And I mean, that's the number of stories that I included about fictional characters coming to life for their creators in Fourth Wall Phantoms pales in comparison to the number of stories that are in this book. And it's Nobel Prize winners and just people that our society thinks of as just being geniuses, and doesn't realize that there's this entire sort of hidden life that they have, where these characters take on an autonomy of their own in some form or fashion. By which I mean they'll sort of hear dialogues in their heads, but on a spectrum that goes all the way through oral manifestations and physical, like I see you or I touch you and interact with my character sort of things happening to them. And this was another phenomenon that I'd encountered just in my conversations with some author friends of mine who write fiction. You know, I had a conversation once about, like, you know, how is it to write fiction? This was before I'd written my novel, The Old Ways Never Died. And part of that novel was to sort of see if I could experience this some. But I asked them, like, how do you find your way through a novel and, like, you know, the plot and everything? And they're like, oh, no, your characters will tell you what to do. And, like, this was said without a hint of irony from some sort of, like, atheist-leaning author friends of mine. And I'm like, do you hear what you just said? You know, it's one of those things, like, there's something really strange that seems to be behind the scenes of that. So it's actually a shockingly common phenomenon. Now, people, as you can see from that Ramesh book, which just came out in 2023, I believe, people have examined this particular issue of fictional incursions, the term that I use, in a couple of different capacities. But what I really wanted to see was, okay, what happens when you take that and you take a look at that body of stories and sightings and experiences, and then you put that in dialogue with UFOs, with cryptids, and with you know, spirits and ghosts and whatnot. And that was sort of what Fourth Wall Phantoms came together into, was like this sort of not dialogue. I've been saying dialogue too many times. Let's say this circuit, this cycle between culture and the paranormal, and how oftentimes it's impossible to figure out if some of these tropes that we associate with real life sightings began in fiction, or did they begin in real life and then make their way to fiction, and, like, you can sort of chicken and the egg it all the way back into prehistory.
We've brought up this example many times on the podcast, the idea of, like, in the 50s, UFO sightings tended to reflect the science fiction B movies of the era. And then in the 60s, we start to see the development of the Grays after Betty and Barney Hill. And then, of course, everything since Close Encounters has pretty much been Grays, right?
We're in the middle of a sea change that I don't think a lot of people have noted.
I would agree.
Well, ever since the Tic Tac, I've been saying, okay, people are going to start seeing drones. And a lot of my friends were like, yeah, but they're not seeing drones. I'm like, give it time. And, you know, I think the end of last year really sort of showed that, setting aside what those drones over New Jersey were, right? The point is that people in their minds have equated drones with UFOs. Like, this is, I think this is another mask that the phenomenon is putting on.
This reminded me of the airship stuff from the turn of the century.
100%. Yeah. So now we have this like continuum that's going from, I don't know, lights in the sky / religious visions to jumping forward eons to airships, to the flying saucer, to the black triangles, to, you know, to the drones now. And I think that this is not getting talked about much at all, but, like, I have some friends in MUFON who are saying that, like, we're not really seeing abductions that much anymore.
Right.
Which is not saying that they don't happen, but, like, what we're seeing a lot more of are just, like, experiences, downloads, consciousnesses going to other places, but we're not seeing that sort of, like, 1980s pageantry of the people being plucked from their beds and taken to a room and being operated on.
Which, sure, by the way, I'm fine with. If they're done, if the aliens are done and the government are done with that program, thank you. Let's not do that anymore.
Right. Yeah.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah, just send me the download. I'll just take the Dropbox link. You don't need to drag me over there.
One size never fits all for these stories, right? So, like, I'm sure that still happens, and I'm not diminishing anybody's experience if they have had that happen recently. But as a whole, this is what researchers are saying that they're seeing. So, again, like, this thing is evolving beside us, at least in the UFO sphere. And, you know, I still maintain a bit of a soft spot for flesh and blood Bigfoot, but I think that there's an argument to be made that aspect of the phenomenon seems to be doing some changing as well.
I agree. Okay, let's take another quick break. When we come back, just more of this.
All right.
So before the break, we were getting into the idea of how this idea... We're getting into the idea of the idea. Great sentence, Michael.
That's pretty much what it is, though. Really,
it is kind of an idea.
Language fails us all the time, so just roll with it. Yeah.
Well, reading the book, I am very interested in a couple things, and it's going to tie into what you're saying about how this pertains to the UFO and Bigfoot and spectral phenomena, let's say. this idea that something that is either in our collective consciousness or something that is coming from us as we literally create a new character or pick up a character, we're writing about something. There seems to be almost this sense of whatever the phenomenon is, it's picking up on what we are materializing in our own imagination and perhaps manifesting itself as a way to connect with who we are subconsciously or unconsciously. For example, early in the book, you talk about a little girl who had an encounter with a rather sinister Donald Duck in her childhood bedroom that manifested. Now, this is stuff that I can wholly relate to, and I realized reading your book, I think I've had a fictional incursion as a child.
Really?
When I saw what looked like a Jawa and a Jawa's hand outside of my bedroom window when I was about 3.5 years old. And I remember calling to my mother, and she came down and she brought me out to the living room and was rocking me in the rocking chair. And I could see over her shoulder to the deck where my talked about this on the show. My childhood bedroom was on the ground floor, and they did not put blinds or drapes on my windows, and it looked out into the woods. But I saw two little hooded Jawas kind of laughing, holding their hands up to. I said, "Oh, they're laughing at me because they scared me." But I felt calm because I was with my mom, and then I just kind of forgot about it and went back to bed. So this idea of, okay, I'm a kid, I could be seeing things. This little girl saw Donald Duck, they could be seeing things. But what if there is something out there, this phenomenon that is taking the image of the Jawa out of my brain or Donald Duck out of this little girl's brain and manifesting itself as that?
I mean, and that's part of what was so maddening about this project, is because there's so many different directions you can go with this, right? I mean, you could say that, the ones that I'm least sympathetic to are like, oh, George Lucas had some sort of knowledge of alien life and was trying to soft disclose Jawas.
Same with Spielberg and all that stuff.
Whatever, maybe, okay. Or predictive programming that's kind of along the same route, or that they were inspired, like there was some sort of, the aliens were, giving them messages. But I tend to think something more along the lines of what you're driving at, that, this thing, whatever it is, the analogy that I've been really been fond of using is that if you've ever played a video game, especially on PC, and like one of the texture files is corrupted, and so you see a wall, but it's like maybe there's a placeholder there, like a blank white or blank pink or something. It's, so what happens when you look at the phenomenon and it's unskinned? Like there's no cultural assumptions that are attached to it. I think it might be the lights, honestly. Like I think all this stuff might be these lights, and then the light somehow triggers.
You mean like orbs and mysterious lights in the sky?
The lights are the thing. I would argue that the lights are the thing. Anomalous light phenomena are the thing that links all this stuff. Like constantly it crops up in everything, even less discussed, but even in the cryptid reports, right? And so like that might be like the pure unfiltered other, right? And then when we see it, then, light impacts the parts of the brain that produce melatonin, which is related to DMT. So maybe there's something going on there with that. And it's like it's flipping through the Rolodex of your brain and saying, oh, the Jawas, there we go. Mm-hmm. But, you have to sort of tease out some other issues with that, because people sometimes see things that look like a character that they don't realize until they later see the media, and they're like, oh, it looked like that character. So if there wasn't that sort of like, tailor-made appearance that they plucked from somebody's brain, then did it come from like the cloud, to use a modern tech reference? And that's sort of where I kind of have started to go a little bit, is that like, oh, Jawas have always been a thing, and they're always just out there, and they're in that sort of, idea that, it's a quote that's been attributed to Carl Jung, although I don't think he ever really said it, which was, people don't have ideas have people. Like, there was, the Jawas have always been there, Donald Duck's always been there, Constantine's always been there, ideas, there's this imaginal soup of everything that can be that's just out there that sometimes finds people to bring it to life,
Yeah, and we hear this. I mean, you have examples of it in Fourth Wall Phantoms, but this idea of, oh, I was channeling this character in this book, or I was channeling this story. She's fallen out of popularity recently, but a big example is J.K. Rowling talking about riding the train and suddenly seeing Harry Potter, and she talked about how it was almost as if the character showed up in front of her and she had to begin writing about who this boy was with this scar on his head. And that led to, one of the biggest fairy tales in pop culture history.
Yeah. And I still don't know what to do with that. Like, that's the funny thing about the book like this is, like, usually you kind of like form an opinion by the end, but by the end, like, I'm on such unstable ground that I have no real clue. Like, and I can't stay there. Right. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a way to, I don't know if I can live life with the perspectives that I have up until the epilogue of this book. Like, let's just set all that aside. Okay, I've spent some time in this space, but now I've got to like return to some sort of sense of reality because, I've got to dwell in that space puts me in a place of, well, I don't care if this is true or not, or well, if somebody believed it, then that's all that matters. And like, that's not a space that I want to dwell too much. And then I honestly can't dwell if I ever want to write any more books on this topic, right? But I think there's something to be said with it, at least playing with those ideas and sitting in that uncomfortable space. Towards the end of the book, I raised the question, like, what if pareidolia is one of these both and sort of things? Like, what if it is just a pattern and just pattern recognition, but it's also a vector for something to speak to us in its own sort of way. It's this sort of in-between space that is that space of meaning that is what happens between yourself and art, quite frankly. That sort of space of meaning in between there that speaks to you. It's not in the text, and it's not necessarily in you. It's something in between. Or
meaning between you and inanimate objects. Like as a child, when I would take a bath, like the flip between the shower and the faucet looked like a metal Pinocchio face. It had two eyes and a long nose, and it felt like there was it was like the little robot man that lived in the bathtub. That I would visit when I'd take a bath.
We had that exact same one, I think, and I've thought about that too. Yeah, I think I had that exact same one growing up, and yeah, I mean it's one of those things like it's. What I think is sort of sitting with that sort of ambiguity allows me to do personally is to hear these stories about people being like, my grandmother died and 2 days later a butterfly landed on my shoulder and I just knew it was my grandmother. And like, I'm sure that if I was there, I could have just gone, yoink, and I could have grabbed the butterfly and crushed
Come here, Grandma.
But what if the way that reality works is like, it's all of these things at once? Like, it is your grandmother, but it's not. And it's but for you, it's something genuinely anomalous. But for me, it's something different, and it's sort of in an almost state of indeterminacy between those two decisions, And it all comes down to, much like the observer effect, like who it's meant for and who does what with it. I don't know.
You say often in this book, I feel, at least early on, like, this is weird stuff and I might lose you. And like, yep. I'm going out on a limb here with these things, but we do kind of have to look at them. Another phenomenon that I think connects to all of this is when we talk about the occult and we talk about magic ritual. And Alan Moore's another good example of this, where he says writing is spellcasting. It's literally spelling. Yeah. You are spelling words. You are creating worlds using symbols, which in our case is the alphabet, and you are creating whole new realities with these. And so there might be something from an occult perspective of literally bringing these characters to life as we write about them. And who's to say that they aren't literally manifesting maybe in some sort of holographic form, spectral form, maybe limited life of physical form through this old act of writing.
Yeah, spelling, right?
Spelling.
You're spelling, yeah. I mean, and you do find that sort of belief if you go back far enough into some of the Indo-European, language streams where, like, there were words that you didn't say because to say them were to bring them into being. Or to
Speak of the devil comes from that.
Well, I mean, like you just mentioned, Harry Potter, that's the Voldemort thing, like, he who shall not be named, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is also the fairy folklore. That's why you don't call them fairies. You use all these different euphemisms so you don't attract their attention. So I think there's something to that, as you're very astutely point out. We also see this in non-Western belief systems as well. One of the most fascinating things that I don't know if you've gotten here yet, so I'm going to spoil the book for you a little bit. But
no, please.
Y'all are familiar with the Dogon tribe, right? One of those like famous stories from ancient astronaut lore where they're like, oh, the Dogon, miraculously enough, admittedly, looked into the sky and they said that these sky beings that they worship, called the Namo, told them that Sirius was a binary star system, and there was no way they could have known that without having advanced astronomical telescopes and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Cool story. But what the ancient aliens folks never tell you is that the Dogon also have a word for the belief that words can influence reality, that you can speak things into being, and it's also Namo. So the same name for their
sky gods
is that people say are aliens, is the same name for this belief that words and can actually shape reality, and you can actually speak things into being in that way. And that sort of concept is you find that in a lot of different cultures throughout the African continent beyond just Mali. But yeah, this I think at its heart, Fourth Wall Phantoms will probably speak the most to people with occult leanings, because the occultists kind of get this, as you were alluding to. Like, they really do kind of get this. And that's really what ceremonial magic is, right? It's play acting, and you're convincing the spirits that you have the authority that you're acting like you have. You're play acting as King Solomon and commanding them to do this and that and the other. And I think that might be, there are actually some other parapsychologists who have used recreation to tease out, ghost phenomena. And the assumption that we have is that, they're making the ghosts feel at home because they're sort of recreating the period clothing and the way that people would speak and this and that and the other. And so that teases out the genuine phenomena. But another way to make it, to sort of frame that, is that these researchers they're play acting, and they're convincing themselves as much as they're convincing any spirits that this is the setting and that is existing now. And so it is a form of theater that is used to tease out genuine paranormal phenomena.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it's who knows? But if you put that in comparison with something like the Philip experiment, I'm not sure if y'all have ever talked about the Philip experiment, but like
Philip the ghost.
Yeah, if you look at this through that sort of Philip-y context, then it's like, how much of this is outside of us? Or how much of this rather is the thing that we think it is? What if there is just this, again, I hate using the technological metaphors, but what if there is a cloud of ideas that's out there that we just need to create the right parameters to embody here?
I mean, Riley, you've kind of talked about this too. I remember like you dreaming and discovering song in music in your dreams.
Yeah, that's like the most.
Okay,
so it feels like a gift when that happens.
Informal survey. Like, is the best stuff that you've written stuff that has a genesis in that other space?
I probably, or just most. It's like there's the least blockage in the way, There's the least like need for ego to like decode and control it. So it's just like you're just getting it straight from what you would call the source, which like, and just building on that and like based on what you've been talking about, and a thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is this idea that consciousness as we experience it is not the generator of consciousness, but it's like a tuning in to consciousness, and this is not my idea. This is something I was reading about, but that like the idea that consciousness is a fundamental force of the universe, like light or matter or gravity, and that basically we're just like tuning into it. So if you like take that idea and build it into what you're talking about stories, and people sort of like, I follow the characters, it's like, well, you're just like tuning into that sort of consciousness frequency. And I just think that's really like an interesting framework and way to like sort of look at everything. And there's this whole quantum physics side about it, about how, a particle is not in a state until it's perceived. And that's part of this sort of consciousness structure that solidifies the universe. And I've been thinking about that so much as you've been describing this phenomenon.
I resonate with that so strongly. I mean, I do think that in that sense, consciousness is non-local, and we're all TV sets or something. With little antenna inside our brains. And, or another metaphor that I like is like we're just these little waves that are on the ocean, and there's a moment when they crest, and then they go back into the the landscape of the ocean, or the seascape. And yeah, I think it's like this weird sort of, and this is why I tend to pull back from like the multiverse, because it's the multiverses and multiple realities are all like separate. But like once you dial back and with a soft focus and look at ourselves as being embedded in an everything, every when sort of thing. I guess, everything everywhere all at once, right? But I guess what I'm getting at is like, it's trying to put start and end points on these things, or genesis points on these things, as I was talking about how, something will appear in art and then appear in a real story, or does it first appear in a real story and then appear in art? I'm not sure how useful that is, because time and again, like, it's this game of one-upsmanship where you eventually find yourself looking at petroglyphs and you're like, well, it's
here it is.
Well, this is what the petroglyph looks like, but is that art or is that a testimony to what actually happened? Like, this is a completely ambiguous point. Yeah. But yeah, just this sort of like, and that's where I do tend to resonate a bit more with some of these ideas of like monism, that everything is one, and that, there's no real distinctions that can be drawn.
Sure.
I think it's something worth considering.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the story. This idea of the story that you bring up in the book. Can you break that down? I know it's personal, and this book begins with a very personal genesis point for you to get to where you are with all of this stuff. But you attribute the story, you credit the story as the thing that kicked off this book.
Yeah, and saved my life. And don't feel bashful about it, because if I didn't want to talk about it, I wouldn't have put it in the beginning of the book. Right? So
good.
I checked myself into rehab for alcoholism on August 28th, 2020, and a running through line throughout the book is that it's the story that saved my life. And what I mean by that is, like, I have somewhere in this office, but I kept a journal and just filled up the entire journal of just thoughts and, recording experiences there, but also just really trying to have something to anchor me to that moment back then. But one of the things that I did do is I don't even really know what made me do this, but I just took refuge in Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, and tried to be like, okay, well, like, this isn't the hero's journey. Like, sitting in a rehab in North Georgia is not not part of the hero's journey, right? But then being like, oh, this is the belly of the whale, and like,
Dark Night of the Soul.
Dark Night of the Soul, yeah, and like, what are we called to? What are we called to do in those moments? And where I sort of landed for myself was that it's part of the reason that things like addiction are so destructive, is because they sort of fly in the face of this rut, this path that we are called to stay on, right? To be faced with these challenges and to not succumb to them, but to, slay the dragon and find your way out of the forest and all that stuff. And so, what I sort of started playing with out of that, once I got my acts together, and look, part of the reason that I treat that, I bring it up in the beginning of the book, is because, like, it was synchronicity central in my life.
That stuff is pretty. Can you talk about a little bit about that? Checking in and all the synchronicities that followed.
And look, synchronicity. I say this in the book too later. It's like synchronicities are like dreams. Like, your eyes don't feel like you're hurting my feelings if your eyes glaze over, right? Because, like, synchronicities and dreams mean a lot more to the person who's saying them than they do to the person who's hearing them. But yeah, I checked myself in on August 28th, and that is the feast day of St. Moses, who was one of the Desert Fathers who who was known for having a very abrupt and sudden and lasting conversion from being basically a thief and a killer and a ne'er-do-well to being, a paragon of religious faith. And I found a lot of significance in that.
Yeah, day of transformation. Yeah.
Well,
And we should say you didn't check yourself in because of that.
No,
you
I know, I
learned
didn't know
later, does
Yeah.
this date have any significance? And
Yeah.
this is what you found.
Yeah, and then we can sort of come back to that here in a moment because there's something that didn't make it into the book that I just found out. But the retreat was Mount Sinai, so there's another Moses resonance there as well. But I have a good friend whose show I'm going to be on soon, and she's been taking a look at the birth charts of people who have near-death experiences, and has found, this is kind of mind-blowing in and of itself, but has found that there are some people who seem to have a marker in their chart for near-death experiences. Yeah, which raises all sorts of questions about free will and that stuff.
Yeah.
But guess who has one, and guess when it was.
No way.
Yeah, she says it's right over that date.
Wow.
And her take was that, like, I chose to do that as opposed to having it forced on me.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I came home and there was a, I came home and it was just like synchronicity central. Like there were things in my backyard that were moved that my
Talk
wife,
about that fairy tree in your backyard.
Well, see that I have no frame of reference for this because like it means something to me, but like does it mean something?
It's very cool
weird?
to us and our listeners for sure.
Yeah, I have a little like gnome that is that's on a tree in my backyard that I got in the mountains, and it's clearly like a gnome. It's like a little gnome peeking around the edge of the tree. And I also have another tree in the backyard that is I always call the fairy tree because it's split in half and it kind of just looks odd. So I put some milk in there and a coin and some bread and like
Did a little fairy ritual to welcome the fairies.
And so that's beside the tree with the gnome on it. And one day I came home and that gnome was like sitting right there where I put all that stuff. in the weeks after coming back home, like the gnome, somebody had taken the gnome off the tree, which like it doesn't. If it had blown off, it probably would have shattered. I don't think it could have blown off because like it's on two nails that you sort of have to lift and take off. Mm-hmm. And our yard is fenced in. And I asked my wife, I'm like, did you do this? And she's like, no. And the boys were infants at the time, so we're toddlers, I guess. So yeah, it was. Couldn't have even reached it. So I don't know what that was.
Somehow that gnome got there and was sitting right over where you'd buried the coins and done the little ritual.
Yeah. Thank you for putting it in more concise terms than I did it.
No, it's just really cool.
But the one that really just blew my mind was so I get worked up with my sons. I get worked up that there's a lot of software that I need to upload. I get worked up about like there's just little things that you take for granted, like evaporation and precipitation, or the Cold War, or any number of things like you just have like in the back of your mind, you sort of inform the way that you look at world events in the world. And I get really anxious about that. So for whatever reason, I had just latched onto this particular day Aesop's Fables. And I'm like, I've got to make sure that I teach the boys Aesop's Fables. I think there's a lot of important lessons in there. How did I learn about Aesop's Fables? Did I have a book of Aesop's Fables? Did I learn Aesop's Fables through cultural osmosis? Maybe there were cartoons that I learned of Aesop's Fables. Whatever. I just got to make sure I get them Aesop's Fables. I write it down. As soon as I get home, I'm going to go online. I'm going to buy a copy of Aesop's Fables. And I get home, and my wife's like, you got to take the boys for a walk in the stroller. So I'm like, okay. I'm not going to buy Aesop's Fables yet. So I take him around and walk through the neighborhood. The entire time I'm like, don't forget Aesop's Fables, Aesop's Fables, Aesop's Fables. And I get into the garage and there's a phone call from my mom. And she says, hey, we're at the beach at that bookstore that you love. And I just bought the boys something. And it was a copy of Aesop's Fables. I don't know what that is. And, something that runs through the book that I think, deserves to be sort of addressed is the Eric Wargo retrocausality time loop stuff. Was I detecting my mother's purchase of Aesop's Fables, and that's what informed my obsession? I think in some cases it is, because Eric's work is great. There are some cases in the book later where I'm like, this doesn't seem like retrocausality, but that's something that does sort of hang like a specter over the entire idea of fictional incursions. For example, with the Alan Moore Sting example. Like, did Alan Moore invent John Constantine, or was he pre-membering, thinking of, did he get a transmission from the future that he would encounter this really strange character in a sandwich shop?
Right, and it would inspire him in the past to create this character.
Yeah. Falls apart a little bit more, I think, with, the subsequent creators seeing Constantine as well. But still, that's something that I think does play a role in this. But it all comes back to what I've been trying to sort of spotlight, which is this sort of like, oh, it's just everything. Like we're embedded in this simultaneity of everything, and that looks like things from the past now. It looks like things from the future now. It looks like things from across the world now. It looks like things in our ancestral lineage now. It looks like things, and it's just this nowness.
Yeah.
That I think we really exist in.
It's funny how that's the simplest answer is like, oh, it's just everything.
It's just everything.
It's just the source of experience and existence.
Before we say goodbye, which sucks.
This is so quick. This one's so fast.
I know.
Flew by. Yeah.
And before people start to go, well, I don't know. They saw The Shadow and John Constantine. Those are like guys. Like those could just be guys, Right. Tell people about Gumby.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and the funny thing is, like, I didn't even put all the Gumby sightings in there. There's like, there have been a couple of different sightings. One sighting was this couple from near Omaha who were parked near a cornfield, and they saw. I imagine it as that scene from Signs with the alien.
Yep.
But with Gumby going from one cornfield across the road into the other one, but like a 6 foot tall Gumby, right?
Like a Bigfoot story, except it's Gumby.
Yeah, basically. And there are a couple of different Gumby stories. Another book that was sort of formative in writing this was Hallowell's Invisikids, which is all about, imaginary friends and such. And in that book, there's another experiencer who recalled growing up with this character named Gumby, who was green, and at the time in the particular region where they lived, there was no access to the Gumby children's series. And it's just, I think there's like 4 or 5 different mentions of Gumby in the book. And like I said, that's with some that got left on the cutting room floor. What I find really fascinating is the fact that Gumby is a fictional incursion in those stories and is kind of based on a fictional incursion. What do I mean by that, right? There is a documentary of that includes the son of the person who made Gumby, and he originally conceived of Gumby as something like a gingerbread man. And if you look at the gingerbread man, there's actually the Arne Thompson Folklore Index lists different sort of folklore motifs, and there is a motif called the Runaway Pancake collection of stories, which are this idea that this couple or this inventor creates something that then gets out of their control and takes on a life of its own. So Gumby is also based on this idea of fictional incursions as well.
Yeah, he's a spin on the gingerbread man.
Yeah.
That's wild. And it's just crazy too that people are seeing, like, those people who saw Gumby they're not writing about Gumby. You know what I mean? They're just literally seeing Gumby.
Consciousness,
right.
Yeah.
And so that's the one thing that, like, I try to push back a little bit on, is this idea that these things are only for these like dreamy artists. This is something that a lot of people who would not even self-identify as creative experience quite often. So it's and again, I thought there was just going to be a couple of stories. No, it's a whole subgenre. Yeah.
It's wild. Has anything happened after writing this book? Has anything manifested in your life?
Not yet. It's only officially been out mid-month. I will say that, while writing my novel Them Old Ways Never Died, I did have a couple of things which were very much felt like that ideas have people kind of idea concept. There would be answers to things that I'd puzzled over all day that would just come to me on the cusp of sleep. Mm-hmm. I had an interaction with a pharmacist that I was hoping was a fictional incursion, but turns out isn't. But
just a pharmacist,
but looked very similar to a character that's a pharmacist in my novel. So yeah, hints of it, I guess. But I will say that those moments, it's kind of like writing the novel was one of the most exhausting things, because you get those ideas on the edge of sleep, and you're like, well, now I got to write it down. So I was almost asleep, but if I don't write this down, it's just going to evaporate. So
I've done that before.
All day.
Writing comic books, I've literally gotten out of bed and gone, well, let's do it, and sat up till 3 or 4 in the morning just writing the script, because that's when the idea came, and I've got to get it down on paper, because if I fall asleep, I'm going to lose it.
And like, I don't think unless you've had that moment, you can really understand how not you it feels.
Well, even as an actor, I mean, there are characters that I've played, especially Steve Newland from True Blood, which I played for a long time, where he feels like a different entity than me, and I do feel like I channel him. It feels like something separate from me, and something that has a life outside of me, even though it has my face, at least in that version of the character.
Yeah, I mean, and there's towards the end of the book, I go into a couple of examples of people who are method actors and stuff who just sort of went so deep and had trouble like coming back out.
Yeah. Well, I love the book. I cannot wait to keep reading and see where it goes. I find it actually very inspiring as a writer. Like, it makes me want to write. It makes me want to create things and have conversations with them. So I highly recommend our listeners go check it out. Fourth Wall Phantoms.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and the fact that it's resonating with some people means a lot, because it's a personal book. It's a very personal book in a lot of ways. Yeah,
I love it. It's right up my alley. It's weird. It's inspiring, and you've got a great sense of humor in the book. There's a lot of like really funny asides and stuff like that. So it's not a dry read, which I also really appreciate.
Well, thank you so much.
Awesome. So where can people find your book, and where can people find you, Josh?
Yeah, you can find my book. There are 2 ways to get it, one of which I'm not happy about, but it's just the reality that we're in. One of the ways is to go to Amazon, and that is the easiest for me, although if you want to help me out a little bit and sort of circumvent some of the problematic aspects of that, you can reach out to me directly at my website, joshuacutchin.com, JOSHUACUTCHIN.com. And also, while you're there, you can check out some events that I have coming up in May in North Carolina and in August in both Kansas and Missouri.
That's right. My home stomping grounds. Might have to swing by and come see you.
Good.
All right. Joshua Cutchin, thank you so much for being here. Go get that book, everybody. It's good.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We didn't even play Bullshit or Believe It. We got so distracted. God damn it.
I mean, it's all good. That was
what? He'll be back on the show. Don't worry, everybody.
Yeah.
I was like, we'll do that, and but I'm really into this book, and as Josh said as we were hopping off, like, we barely scratched the surface on this stuff. I like it. It's a big, weird idea, and he does a really good job of exploring it. So everyone, go check out that book. Why don't we, before we leave, nominate our 5-star Club Scout of the week? This is somebody who gave us a 5-star review on Amazon, on Apple Podcasts. Same diff, honestly. Helps get the show to more people.
Well, this is from She Sells Seashells, but it's the letter C, which makes me, is this a programming like C++ shell? Maybe not. I don't know. The subject of the review is "Car trip are so much better." Trip is singular.
I think that was my bad. I think it's supposed to be car trips. I think I left out an S.
I was like,
Sorry.
just the one. Well, anyways. Okay. So it's car trips are so much better. And the review is as follows. My favorite pod, entertaining high strangeness. The Jag phone is ringing.
The Jag phone's ringing. Riley's landline that is the shape of a jaguar. We call it the Jag phone. When I can't get a hold of Riley, I will call the Jag phone as the last resort. Look at it. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the Jag phone. Man, that thing is cool.
Yeah, it's pretty badass. But I think oh no, we have a dial tone. It's my landline, everyone. Only a few people. Only very, very limited people have that number.
It's in my phone as Jag phone. So, and when Riley picks up the phone,
I'm 90% sure that was Caitlin calling because my cell phone buzzed. Anyways, let's give this review a read.
Car trips are so much better.
My favorite pod, entertaining high strangeness for a closet paranormal weirdo. 5 stars.
Love
You're
it.
One of us. Come on out of the paranormal closet.
She sells seashells. And we have some other people to thank as well. Let's do some Patreon shout outs. These are some folks that recently joined us over at BCC The Other Side. A little hello and thank you to Michael Martin.
Thank you.
And Rob Whitaker.
Oh, thanks, Rob.
Yeah, you can join Michael and Rob and become an official Club Scout when you join patreon.com/BigfootCollectorsClub, where you will unlock total access to BCC with 3 bonus episodes every month, access to the BCC Discord, and more. You can also upgrade to the Cosmeteer membership for ad-free main feed episodes and exclusive music tracks from the polyphonic sound blaster himself, Riley.
Indeed.
Let's swing over to Collector's Corner. What are you reading, watching, collecting, consuming?
What am I this week? I don't know. I actually less consuming, more. Here's what I'm doing.
Oh yeah, you're building robots now.
It's this little guy.
He's holding up a little computer board. What do you call it? Motherboard.
It's like a little circuit board. It's a breadboard for prototyping a circuit. I got this little module here.
If you've not been over on the Patreon, you are not hearing about how Riley's building an AI in an aquarium.
I am, but hold on. This is
okay. We'll pause here.
Hello? Lol.
BCC offices, phones are ringing off the hook.
It's the mid-afternoon. Let's get to work.
I love it. Anyways, but you've been building.
Yes.
You've been building an AI in like a terrarium, and you're now building robots.
This is a little machine, and you hook electrodes up to your body, and it reads your heart rate as electricity, and then it boosts and filters it and outputs it as sound. So
just becoming a Doc Brown over there. Like one more.
We all knew this is where I was headed eventually.
You're gonna build a giant amp that when you play the guitar, it blows you across the room, and then the next thing you know, you're building a time machine.
Yeah. It's only a matter of time. I mean, we can. A boy can dream, huh? Anyways, that's what I've been doing. I'm building, but it's really fun. I took like one electrical engineering class in college. I have like a very, very, very cursory knowledge. Like we're talking basic, but using AI. Sorry guys, if you don't like it, I do. I've been learning circuit design and building, and I built this circuit, and it works. And it's such a trip to be able to listen to the electricity of my heart in real time. It's for an art installation that's coming up that I'll talk more about on another episode.
For the genesis of Skynet.
And yeah,
which turns out you're responsible for, Riley.
I'm poking it with the stick. Yeah. What can I do? What can I say? Do something.
I'm going to reserve my plugs for Fourth Wall Phantoms. I'm really enjoying it. So go check that out. I will put a link in the show notes. If you're down in the show notes and you want to swing by my eBay shop and order a copy of my graphic novel Adventure Van, which I will sign for you. By the way, my new cryptid doodle I've been doing. Speaking of bringing fictional characters to life, if you're watching this, I am holding up the very first drawing I did of Little Loveland Tadpole Boy. And I have so good. This is the rough draft version. This is the first drawing of him. He's wearing a little sailor's hat. He's got a little bit of a snail trail behind him. God. He's evolved since this. I kept the original, but I have sent out the second and third drawings of Little Loveland Tadpole Boy have gone to people who have ordered Adventure Van. So
wow, that's worth the price of admission alone, right there. One of the original genesis of Little Loveland Tadpole Boy.
This is his first physical incarnation.
Dude, that is amazing. I love that.
All right,
so much.
Links in the show notes.
All right. You know what? It's only a matter of time before he breaks the fourth wall.
I know. Let's see if I can actually manifest Little Loveland Tadpole Boy. All right. One last thanks to Josh for joining us. If you miss us this week, you can come find us on YouTube and The Other Side. If we don't see you over there, we'll see you back here next week for an all new episode of BCC. Until then, good night.
And go get regressed. And you may see the Tadpole Boy.
I'm a real boy. Oh boy.
Bigfoot Collectors Collectors Club is produced and engineered by Riley Bray and executive produced by Riley Bray and Michael McMillan. Our theme song, Come Alone, is by Suneaters, courtesy of Lotuspool Records. Follow Suneaters on Spotify. For 3 bonus episodes every month and ad-free episodes, check out BCC The Other Side at patreon.com/BigfootCollectorsClub.